Well, good morning. Well, when I heard in the announcements that you had a psychic ministry, I was like, wow, you guys are really open-minded here at E-Hill. So thanks so much, Tom. I got to meet Tom about a year ago. I was actually here 2 years ago when you guys were still looking for a pastor. And so getting to meet Tom last summer was awesome. And as we've gotten to talk even the last several weeks, and he's kind of told me what it's been like being here, I just want you, when pastors get together, we talk about you. You may not realize that, but we do. We talk about our congregations, and we're really honest about them. And here's two things I love about Tom. Number one, Tom loves Jesus. And number two, and I want you to know this with all sincerity, Tom loves you. Like, he loves you guys. He brags on you. He is proud of the work that you guys are doing in this community. He is so grateful for what you're doing. So please know that that is sincere from him when he says it, and he even tells his buddies that that's true. So I'm delighted and honored to be here then with you because you are an amazing group of people. I wanted to really quickly introduce my family to you. This is my wife, Emily, and my sons, Jack and William. Jack is 12 years old. He's on the right. William is 9 years old, and he is on the left. This is the kind of photo we send to people to let them know that our family says hi. This is more like what we are when they're not around. So I love these people. We're actually on a road trip right now. We started in LA, and we've been heading across the country, west to east. And so we've just driven through most of the state of Colorado at this point. And at some point on the way here, my kids decided to start holding their breath for every mountain tunnel that we went through. So every time we'd go through a tunnel, I'd hear them go, and then after the end, I'd hear them go, and then we got to the Eisenhower-Johnson tunnel, and I heard, and I never heard anything else. So they will be missed. It's really a shame. So it's a beautiful state. My brother actually lives here, and I grew up in Texas, and now I live in California, so I am the embodiment of the two kinds of people you love the most, and that's a delight to be here. I do not wear blue jeans when I ski, and I thought you should know that straight away. I want to talk to you this morning. I want to encourage you, and I want to remind you. There's two things I want to do. And so I recognize E-Hills every week. You guys have people who come and attend this church, like check this church out, and you're not sure where you are on the faith journey. You're not sure what you think about Jesus yet, and we're so delighted that you're here and that you'd be willing to give Jesus a chance today. But I do want to talk more directly to those of you who've already chosen to follow Jesus this morning. So if that's not you, like, this is a great kind of family conversation you can hear us have about what I believe God has called the church to be. I want to talk to you about the church of Jesus this morning. And in the book of Galatians, one of the very first Christians, apostle by the name of Paul, he writes what a Christian should look like once they've placed their hope in Jesus and have been filled with his Spirit. And it says that the fruit of that Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. But if you look at any survey that's been done recently by Pew Research or Barna or any kind of like research arm, when Americans who are not churchgoers are asked about their opinions of what they think the church in the United States is like, the fruit of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, that does not come up. That's not what they think about the church. And unfortunately, we've had some really bad church scandals at some churches across the U.S., and what makes the news? Bad news makes the news. And so you have pastors who preach one thing on a Sunday and then live a totally different way throughout the week, and then they get caught, and it's a massive scandal, and it should be. It's total hypocrisy. You also have a lot of churches that have decided like the best way to try and represent Jesus just by grabbing as much power and political power as they possibly can and always seeing themselves as an oppressed minority within the United States and just trying to circle the wagons and defend. And those people are on the news all the time. Those pastors are on the news all the time. And so for many people outside of the church, the way they see the church is this full of hypocrites and mostly concerned about its own well-being. But if you've been a follower of Jesus for a while, if you've immersed yourself at all in the teachings of Jesus, you know that's not the way it's supposed to be. And you probably know that most churches actually aren't like that. They're trying very hard to strive. This morning, I just want to talk about the church of Jesus. I want to talk specifically about your role in the church of Jesus. A few months ago, my wife turned 40 years old. I was excited because I'm about 3 years older than she is, and I've been waiting for her to get to the 40s for 3 years, right? And I just gave her so much guff about it. It was really great. But I decided to take her on a trip, and we went to Solvang, California. Now, people go on trips for different kinds of reasons. That's not surprising. People have different kinds of interests, right? Some people love football. Some people love basketball. Some people love Mexican food. Some people love Italian food. Some people love country music. Some people love real music. So it really just does depend. Sorry, I'm just kidding. I don't like country music personally, but I don't want to denigrate those of you who do. And if you do like country music, denigrate means to put down. Just kidding. It's an old Bob Newhart joke. I think it still plays. Anyway, so I don't know why you go on trips and what you try to do, but a lot of times we try to find places that have awesome food. And so Solvang, California is a Dutch town that's filled with like bakeries and Michelin-starred restaurants. And it was our 40th birthday, so we decided to splurge and we went and we had some amazing food. We were looking for a great breakfast place one morning. And so we started asking some of the locals and some of the concierges at our hotel, where should we go? And everybody kept saying like, you should go to Bob's Well Bread. It's a little bit north of town and it is amazing. So we kept hearing that over and over. So then we looked on Yelp to see what the reviews were. And Bob's Well Bread had hundreds of reviews, but it only had 3 stars. I was like, wow, I wonder why there's such a difference between what we're being told and what we're seeing online. And then as I read through the reviews, this is what I figured out. The food gets 5 stars. Bob gets 1 star. People do not like Bob. Bob's actually at the register. He takes your order as you walk up, and Bob's not super kind. In fact, a number of the reviews online would point us to this. So here's one. He says, you know the soup Nazi? From Seinfeld, for those of you who are over 40. You know the soup Nazi? Well, you get the idea. Expect a good product, don't expect a warm welcome. Someone else wrote, it's a good thing that the food is good because the owner of this place literally acts as though you are inconveniencing him with your business. Every time I come in here, I swear it's going to be the last time. But then they wrote, the cookies keep me coming back though. Right? It's tough. A multitude of sins can be overcome with a good cookie. And then one said, really, Bob? All I asked was to substitute a bagel for the biscuit, and he said no with a deadpan face. I couldn't believe it. So I'm reading through these reviews, and it sounds rough, and it sounds like it might be challenging, but then I started thinking, maybe the problem is all these hundreds of people. Maybe Bob will like me, right? Like, if I could just get in there, I'm likable enough. Maybe I could get in there and do it. So we go to the bakery, and there's a long line out the door. And so we're having to wait in line for a while, and they have paper menus that you can grab at the back of the line to figure out what you want your order to be. And then we get up pretty close to the register, and Bob is manning the register. And that man's lips have never formed a smile. He does not know how to do it. And so we see him, and there's a little sign about 5 feet back from the cash register that says, do not cross this line unless you're ordering. And there's a yellow line on the floor. And so we're like 3 people back from the yellow line. And I look at my wife, and she's looking at the menu still. And I said, do you know what you want to eat yet? And she says, no, I haven't figured it out. And I said, well, you better figure it out. The pressure's on, like, please don't embarrass me in front of Bob. Like, you gotta figure it out. And so she's like, we get up to the line, and she's like, okay, I think I got it. And I was like, great. So then it's our turn. We take our step forward, and 2 older people come with us who are behind us. We're not with them. And so Bob looks at the guy behind me and says, are all 4 of you together? And the guy says, no, we're just by ourselves. So he looks at this older gentleman and says, get behind the yellow line. The sign clearly says you're not to cross it until it's your turn to order. So the guy backs up. And I'm like, oh no, Bob's already flustered. So I start trying to make my order, but I forget all English words. And I just start saying souffle, egg, I don't know what I'm talking about. Emily forgets her order. It does not go well. As we're walking away, Bob is just shaking his head. And I'm like, well, we failed. We failed the test. It's not a Bob thing, it's an us thing. Have you ever been judged on your worst moment rather than your greatest potential? Have you ever been judged on your worst moment rather than your greatest potential? I think, unfortunately, that the church in the United States is very much perceived in popular culture by our worst moments and not our greatest potential. And that is, let me just name it, that's our fault. That's our fault. We keep having bad moments. Can you imagine in your own life having moments where you don't live up to the call of Jesus if you're a follower of Christ? Or maybe you're not. Maybe you're still checking out faith and spirituality. You probably still have a moral code of conduct that you try to follow. And let's just name that sometimes we fail to measure up to either the call of Jesus or even our own moral code. And if that was all that people saw, they would have a certain idea of us. If me fumbling and bubbling through an order is all that Bob saw, he might think I'm an idiot, which in this case would be accurate, but it wouldn't be the full representation of everything I am. Have you ever been judged on your worst moment rather than your greatest potential? I want to talk this morning about the church of Jesus. The message today is called, Isn't She Lovely? Because while I believe that the church is scarred and stained and sometimes full of hypocrites, the church, as Jesus invited it to be, is a beautiful force for good in the world, representing God. And I want the church to be everything Jesus believed we could be. And here's the amazing thing about Jesus. Jesus saw the greatest potential, it seems like, in every person he came across. In fact, even when he was upset with people, like the religious leaders of his day, he was upset with them because they had all the information they needed. to live up to God, who God had invited them to be, and they weren't doing it. So he calls out greatness from people who are far from God and from people who are religious and not living it out the way that they should be. I want to show you an example of that. There's a passage in the book of Luke in chapter 7, and Jesus has been invited to dinner with a religious leader named Simon. And so he sits down to dinner, and Simon's a Pharisee, and he's got other religious leaders in the room, and they're very skeptical about Jesus, very cynical that he is a great teacher. He doesn't hang around with the right people. He says things that are off-putting. So Jesus is there, these religious leaders are there, and while they're eating, doorways in the first century were just open. Most homes didn't have like a door, you just kind of like curtains, or you just walk in. This woman walks in, and everyone in the room knows her. These towns were small. They know who she is. She's a prostitute. And so this woman walks in, and she goes over to Jesus, and it seems that at some point in his ministry, he had shown her grace or mercy, and that she had then sought him out because she had a connection with him, and my guess is he looked at her differently than other people. Other men probably either looked at her with lust or with condemnation, and Jesus looked at her with neither. And so this man who treated her like a human being, who gave her dignity, she comes and she finds him, and she pours out expensive perfume, and she weeps on his feet. She dries his feet with her hair. It is a big scene that she creates. And Simon, this religious leader, is sitting there thinking if Jesus was such a great rabbi, if he was a great teacher, he would know who this woman is, and he would have nothing to do with her. So he doesn't say any of that out loud, he just thinks it. And the next passage tells us that Jesus replied to him. You gotta watch your thoughts around Jesus, okay? He knows you when you're sleeping. It's fine. So in Luke chapter 7, we read this. Look at this woman kneeling here, he says. So he's basically going to push back against what Simon is thinking. When I entered your home, you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet. By the way, hospitality was huge in the first century amongst the Jewish people. These dusty roads, your feet would have been disgusting, walking these all the time. And so it was customary that when you came into a home, they would wash your feet for you. It's just the thing that you should do, you didn't do that. Right, you had the opportunity, but you didn't offer me water to wash the dust from my feet. But she's washed them with her tears and wiped them with her hair. And you didn't greet me with a kiss. But from the time I first came in, she has not stopped kissing my feet. You neglected the courtesy of olive oil to anoint my head, but she has anointed my feet with rare perfume. In other words, you're such a great religious leader. All of these common, customary things that you would do to honor your guests, you did none of that. And this woman who you're looking down upon did all of it. I tell you, her sins, and they are many. He doesn't hide that. He doesn't pretend that's not true. He knows exactly who she is. He knows exactly how she's been living. Yes, she has a lot of sin. But her sins, and they are many, they've been forgiven. So she has shown me much love. But a person who is forgiven little shows only little love. And then Jesus says to the woman, your sins are forgiven. Jesus does this with the greatest of sinners. He does this with anyone who's willing to change the trajectory of their life. And the difference between Simon and Jesus is a stark one in this passage. See, Simon saw the worst of who she'd been, but Jesus saw the best of who she could be. And I believe Jesus sees the church like that, the best of who the church could be. And look, it's not what makes it onto the news. And I believe Jesus sees the best of who you could be, the best of who you could be. And that's important because the church is just a large grouping of a bunch of individuals trying to follow after Jesus Christ. And the church will follow after Jesus insofar as the individuals within the church work together to follow after Jesus. Simon saw the worst of who she'd been. Jesus saw the best of who she could be. My son, William, is 9 now, but when he was 7 years old, they did a class project where they had to figure out what they wanted to be when they grew up. And so then we didn't know about this as the parents, so we came on parent-teacher night, and all of them had a photograph of themselves taken next to the title of what they wanted to be when they grew up, future, whatever that would be. And so when we walked in the room, I saw this, and my son's is behind that black square. I'll show you his in a minute. But here's who he's surrounded by: future scientist, future president, future doctor, future police officer, future veterinarian. And then I saw my son's, bold, right there in the middle of everybody else's. Future Bigfoot hunter. Yeah. So I'm standing there looking at his poster, and another dad walks up to me, and he sees what I'm looking at, and he goes, "That's your boy?" And I said, "Yep." He said, "You must be so proud." I said, but see, at least I know my son's never moving out of the house. Like, a lot of people have to wait till their kids are 30 to figure that out. I just know for sure that's not going to happen. So you can look at this and you can say, look, all these people have these aspirations, and then there's this one dopey kid that's gonna be a future Bigfoot hunter. You can see what he wrote down. You can see the worst of what he said he would be. Or if you're his dad, you could see the best of what's possible, which is that he could be the best Bigfoot hunter the world has ever known. Simon saw the worst of who she was. Jesus saw the best of who she could be. And look, I want you to remember this. Whenever you get down on yourself for not quite living up to everything you could be, whenever your church fails, and here's the deal, guys, East Hills, you're a large church. Thousands of people call this church their home. There are going to be problems. Not everything's going to be perfect. Your staff are human beings. They're gonna make mistakes. Your volunteers are gonna make mistakes. Like, things won't always go perfectly. And please remember that even in the midst of that, Jesus sees the best of who you could be. In fact, I'd go far as to say this: before you ever believed in Jesus, Jesus believed in you. And that is a wonderful thing on an individual level, but it is also a wonderful thing on a corporate level. Like, what does it look like for the church to recognize that Jesus believes in the church just as the church believes in Jesus? He called you to something beautiful. So I really want to spend the rest of our time together, the next 15 minutes or so, just talking briefly about what it looks like for the church to be the church, for the church to live out the best that Jesus believed you could be. Because the reality is, we don't always look like that, and there's a lot of people, understandably, who struggle with this. But in John 15, this is part of a series of chapters. John 13 through 17 are called the farewell discourse. There's a series of speeches and prayers that Jesus gives to his disciples toward the end of his life, right before he would be arrested, tried, and then crucified. And the author of John is trying to share this with the church community he was a part of so that they can be encouraged about what the church can be. And this is what Jesus says in John 15, verse 9. He says, I have loved you even as the Father has loved me. Remain in my love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in his love. When you obey my commandments, you remain in my love, just as I obey my Father's commandments and remain in my love. So how do you stay in his love? You obey his commandments. And not a legalistic kind of way, but because you're becoming the kind of person that Jesus invited you to be, and therefore you live the kind of life that Jesus lived. And so it's not about just checking off rules, it's about becoming a whole different kind of person. My friend Greg is a pastor in St. Paul, Minnesota. And a few years ago, he was doing a road trip cross country like my family and I are doing this month. And he stopped at a truck stop. He was just by himself, and he just needed to get some gas. And he ate at a diner there at the truck stop. And so he came in, he sat on one of the stools, and a truck driver came and sat down next to him. And they started up a conversation. The truck driver started, after just a few minutes, to brag a little bit about how good he was at his job. And he's so good at his job that he could do all kinds of drugs and substance abuse and still be one of the top people in the company. And then he started talking about how many women he had bedded and just all kinds of stuff. And then he looked at my friend Greg and said, and what do you do for a living? And Greg said, well, I'm a pastor. And this truck driver became an entirely different person for a moment. He was like, oh, pastor. Oh, I love God. I respect God so much. I'm so glad that when I was a little boy, my grandmother took me down the aisle of a Baptist church and I said a prayer of confession to God and invited Jesus in my heart. So no matter what I do for the rest of my life, I get to be in eternity with Jesus. Is that Christianity? A prayer prayed as a child and then no more thought given to it till you run into a pastor in a truck stop in your 40s? See, Jesus invited us into an entirely new way of life. If you want to remain in his love, he says, you obey my commandments. Live like I live. See, Christianity is not primarily about something you believe, but someone you become. For those who put their trust in Jesus, it's not about just following some rules after that. It is about becoming an entirely new kind of person. For those of you who haven't decided to put your trust in Jesus yet, I just want to invite you to consider the new life he has waiting for you. It's a life of beauty and love. It'll make your life better, as you guys say here at E-Hills often. And it doesn't mean it takes away all the challenges of life, but it does mean that you have someone who is always with you as you walk through them. Christianity is not primarily about something you believe, but someone you become. And when you aren't becoming that person, It's easy to get down about that. It's easy to get down about that. Just like if you have kids, if they disobey, it's easy to get down about that. I have 2 children, and when we first moved to California, they realized that we were only about 35 minutes away from Disneyland within like the first week. It's the most expensive discovery they've ever made in their entire lives. So we decided to go once, and then we decided to get season passes. So we took out a second mortgage on the house, and we bought season passes to Disneyland. And they love the ride Splash Mountain. And so we went and did Splash Mountain the very first time we went to Disneyland. And that afternoon, it was hot outside. Splash Mountain was amazing. If you sit on the first row or two, I mean, you get completely drenched, totally soaked. And then we had a great rest of the day. And then after the sunset, about 8:30, 9 o'clock that night, my son Jack said, I want to do Splash Mountain again. And I said, I don't. It's chilly outside now, and I don't want to be wet the rest of the night. And he said, oh, but Dad, it's my favorite ride. We'll have so much fun. I said, but Jack, we don't get to pick what seats we're put in when we ride Splash Mountain. If they put us at the front, I'm gonna be soaking wet the rest of the night. And he said, Dad, if they put us at the front, I'll sit in the first seat and I'll get the wettest. I said, you promise? He said, I promise. So we went and rode Splash Mountain again. We got in line for it, and we got all the way up to the front, and then they put us in the first seat. And Jack walked to the first seat, and then he turned around, and with tears in his eyes, he said, I don't wanna ride up here. And I said, you promised. He said, I know, but I don't wanna ride up here. Fine. So I got in the first seat, and we had another ride. I want you to look, by the way, where his head should be. He didn't just skip out on the first seat. He ducked completely behind me to not get wet at all. When our kids break promises, or when our kids misbehave or disobey, sometimes there's something inside of us that starts to freak out a little bit. Why is that? Is it just because we're control freaks? For some of you, that is the reason. But for most of us, that's not it. What's the thing? Because their behavior that's outside of what we want for them is a threat to the person we know they can be. See, Christianity is not primarily about something you believe, but someone you become. And when we start to sit outside of the commands of Jesus Christ, it's not just like, oh, he didn't check all the boxes. Jesus isn't just like, oh, you're not following all the rules. Like, no. It's a threat. The person you are being right now is a threat to the person I know you can be, the person I know you can become. And so Jesus invites us into that, to follow after him. John 15, verse 11, just picking up after 10. I've told you these things, Jesus said, so that you will be filled with my joy. Yes, your joy will overflow. And this is my commandment: love each other in the same way I have loved you. I've told you these things. Why have I told you this? To obey my commands, to remain in my love, so you'll be filled with joy. When people outside of the church are asked, what's the church in the United States like? Is the first word that comes to mind for them joy? They're joyous. They're so loving. They're so sweet. It's not. Why? Because a lot of times we're not that joyous. We're just as scared and ticked off and anxious as everybody else, and sometimes more so. Because we haven't remained in his love. But the invitation is to remain in his love, to be filled with joy. Love each other in the same way I have loved you. And the first followers of Jesus heard that command to love each other in the same way I have loved you, and they did it. They wrestled with what it meant. They argued sometimes and disagreed about what it meant, but man, they did it. And you know what happened? It changed the world. In fact, 2 books written by non-Christians. One is called Dominion by Tom Holland, not the Spider-Man actor. It's a historian in the UK. And he wrote a book a few years ago about how the moral compass of the Western world changed due to the teachings of Jesus and the writings of St. Paul. Like there is a before and an after in the moral compass of the Western world because of what Jesus taught. Why is that? It's because Jesus taught something radical in the first century. Lots of people thought it was a good thing to care for your family and for your friends and for your loved ones, and perhaps then your city, and perhaps then your state or your country. But just caring for poor people or the destitute, that was not a thing people talked about doing. Really, you can even read some of the great philosophical minds of the first century. There are Stoics who are writing brilliant things that are still helpful today, but they're still not taking care of the poor and destitute. They don't seem to have this ability to understand that every person is of infinite worth and infinite value, so they just don't live like that's true. The first Christians, understanding this, recognize that the value of someone isn't caught up in what they're able to accomplish or how much money they're able to make or what they're able to contribute to society. They're of infinite worth because they're created in the image of God. And so Jesus taught the early church to love each other as he has loved us, which means a willingness to go so far as to lay your life down to love other people. So in about the 4th century, a number of Christians sold all of their property, some of which was inherited from very wealthy parents, and they started a hospital system in Rome. There weren't hospitals before that in the West. There was home care and there were medical professionals, but they came into homes of wealthy people. If you didn't have money, you just received care from the people who were a part of your family, and that could be helpful, but it only went so far. In the 4th century, Christians started hospitals. And then they believed, you know what, there are a lot of children who aren't taken care of, so they started the West's first orphanages. And then they believed, you know what, there's some older people, when they get to a certain age, they're not able to take care of themselves as much, and their families are incapable of fully handling. So they started nursing homes as well. Some of the major foundational blocks of what we would consider a social safety net in modern Western history were started by Christians who understood Jesus' command to love each other and to love the world as Jesus loved us, and they try to implement that in every part of their life. The world is different before and after because of that. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. But for some of us, if I were to sit you down and we were just having a one-on-one cup of coffee this afternoon, and you were to tell me your church story, I recognize that there are probably a number of people in this room who walked in here this morning with oceans of church hurt. Like someone said something to you or treated you in such a way or shut down your questions or maybe even abused you in a church environment. And when you think of the church, you don't think about how lovely she is. And I just want to encourage you to recognize that it wasn't like the church as an amorphous organization that hurt you. There's not like a church monster that came to get you. There are people with names, and they hurt you in a place, in a specific way. That's who hurt you. And I would hate for that painful experience, as horrible and awful and painful as I know it probably could have been, I would hate for it to rob you of the love and the joy that you can find in Jesus when you connect to a church family. The book of Revelation calls the church the bride of Jesus Christ. He's our groom. And the idea is that she can be beautiful when she looks most like Jesus. And if you've been hurt, or if you mostly check out church on TV and see it on the news, or see the big-haired pastors who are often interviewed on a lot of these news stations, and that's where your idea of church comes from, well, it's easy to see the worst of who she's been. It's harder to see the best of who she could be. But I want to invite you to see the best of who the church could be, even if that hasn't always been your experience, and to remind you, we are the church. Let's be as beautiful as Jesus believed that we could be. He believed it. In 2024, just last year, an evangelist was very helpful for me when I was a teenager, by the name of Tony Campolo, passed away, and he was older. He lived a good, full life. I love Tony because he was on staff at a university. He taught sociology. In fact, he was a sociologist before he was an evangelist. And so I heard him say one time that if he was on an airplane ride and he had a chatty neighbor on an airplane, and they looked over and they asked him, hey, what do you do for a living? If he wanted to engage in a conversation, he would tell them, well, I'm a sociologist. And they would always find that really interesting. And so they would talk about, human behavior and psychology and sociology. And sometimes he would work in faith and spirituality and have these really good, robust conversations. But if he was really tired and exhausted and didn't want to have a chat, and they said, what do you do for a living? He would say, I'm a Southern Baptist preacher traveling the world and trying to win souls for the sake of Jesus Christ. And that shut the conversation down immediately. In the late 1970s, Tony was invited to speak in Honolulu. That's how it goes. Sometimes you draw Aurora, sometimes you draw Honolulu. So he went to Honolulu. And if you're from the East Coast, you wake up really early in Honolulu because there's a 6-hour time difference from the East Coast to Hawaii, and that's where he was from. And so he woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning, not tired at all, could not go back to sleep. And so he was hungry, and he decided to just kind of walk the streets of Honolulu and try to find a place to eat. So he discovered this greasy spoon, He walked in and the place was totally empty. It was a pretty small little diner. And no booths, just a bar at the front with a bunch of stools in front of it. And so he went up and sat in the middle stool. And he saw a menu in front of him, but it was a plastic menu that had been like caked in years of grease on top of it. He was afraid if he opened it up, something extraterrestrial might crawl out of it. So he just left it where it was. This very large, overweight guy came out from behind the back, and he had on an apron that was untied, and he was smoking a cigar. It was the 70s. And he said, "Morning, what do you want?" Tony said, I'll take a black coffee and a donut, please. So this guy, his name was Harry, big tag on, he poured him his coffee. And they went over to the donut case, and Harry did this. Then he reached in and just picked up the donut and brought it over to Tony. I hate that. So Tony's sitting there eating his dirty donut, and at about 3:30 in the morning, about 10 or 11 prostitutes walk into the diner. They'd finished kind of their night shift working, and they came in to get some food before they would go home and sleep and wake up the next day and go again. And so they all sit to his left and to his right, and he's trying to blend in, but it's not working so well. And the one to the right of him was talking to her friend to the right of her, and she was just telling her, like, "Hey, tomorrow's my birthday. I'm gonna be 39 years old." And her friend said, "Okay, so tomorrow's your birthday. What do you want me to do about it? You want me to sing you a song? Happy birthday? You want me to get you a cake?" She said, No. I just want to tell somebody it was my birthday. You don't have to be so mean about it. She's like, "I'm 39 years old. I've never had a real birthday party in my entire life. I don't expect it to start now." And that did it. Tony waited for them to leave, and then he called Harry out. He said, "Hey, Harry, there's a woman sitting right here." He said, "Oh, that's Agnes." He said, "Yeah, she said that tomorrow's her birthday. Harry, would it be okay if we threw her a birthday party tomorrow morning? Like, do they come in here every morning?" He was like, "They come in here every morning. Could we throw her a birthday party tomorrow morning?" Harry said, "Oh, mister, that's a great idea." And he called his wife who was cooking in the back. Jeannie, come out here." So Jeannie comes out and said, "This guy thinks we should throw Agnes a birthday party tomorrow." She said, "Oh, mister, that would be a great idea." She's like, "She's one of the good ones. I know what she does to make money, but she is one of the good ones. Believe me, that would be amazing." So Tony said, "Well, could I decorate the place for it?" And she said, "To your heart's content." He said, "I'll bring a big cake in here." He said, "No, the cake is my thing." Oh, okay. So he leaves. And later that afternoon, he goes to Kmart. If you know, you know. And at Kmart, he buys a bunch of crepe paper and birthday hats and balloons and like a sign that you're able to customize, a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Agnes. And so he brings it back at 2:30 the next morning. They decorate the whole thing. Happy birthday, Agnes, big sign, all the balloons, the hats, everything. And so he's ready by 3 a.m. to go. And Jeannie had gotten the word out to some of the other prostitutes in the city that they were throwing a birthday party for Agnes. So by 3:15 in the morning, that place was completely packed with wall-to-wall prostitutes. And Tony. 3:30 a.m., Agnes walks in with her friends, opens the door, place is completely packed out, and everybody yells, "Happy birthday, Agnes!" And her knees buckled. And everybody cheers and screams, and they bring her over to a seat, and they sit her down. And Harry comes out with a cake, and the candles are lit, and they sing to her, "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday, dear Agnes." So Harry's standing in front of Agnes, and she has started weeping at this point. She's just an uncontrollable mess. And Harry looks at her and said, "Okay, pull it together, Agnes, pull it together, blow out the candles, blow out the candles." And she can't do it. So Harry blows out the candles. So then he hands her a knife. He's like, "Cut the cake, Agnes, cut the cake." And she says, do I have to cut the cake? And she looks at Tony. She said, "Do I have to cut this?" He said, "No, you can do whatever you want. It's your cake." She said, "Well, I'd really like to go give it to, I'd like for my mom to see it." He said, "Well, that'd be okay. You can show your mom." So she started to stand up, and he was like, "Well, do you have to leave right now?" She said, "I'm 2 doors down. I just want to go show her the cake, and I'll bring it right back, I promise." He says, "Yeah, you can do that." So she picks up the cake like it's the Holy Grail. She nudges past all the people and walks out the front door, and the door closes behind her. Tony said like a very awkward, very long silence just filled the room, and he wasn't sure what to do. So he just turned around and said, "Hey, what if we prayed?" It was a weird thing to say in hindsight, perhaps. But it was the right thing to do. And so this entire room full of prostitutes and Harry and Jeannie and Tony, they bow their heads, and Tony prays for Agnes. He blesses her. He prays for deliverance from any terrible thing that any man has ever done for her. And then he prayed that she would be made new, Because people of Jesus are those who believe that we are to proclaim that no matter where you've been or what you've done, you can be made new. And then he said, amen. Harry looked at him and said, hey, Campolo, you lied to us. You said you were a sociologist. You're a preacher. What kind of church do you preach at? And in one of those moments where just the perfect thing comes to mind, Tony Campolo said, I preach at the kind of church that throws birthday parties for whores at 3:30 in the morning. Harry said, no, you don't. No, you don't. I would join a church like that. Wouldn't we all? Wouldn't we all join a church at those birthday parties for prostitutes at 3:30 in the morning? I've got news for you. That is exactly the kind of church that Jesus Christ came to set up. I don't know where we got this idea of a half country club that so many churches are operating on. Jesus said he came that your joy may be complete. He came to share love and joy with you, and the church is to share it with everybody. We are to celebrate with those who have nothing to celebrate. We are to throw parties for those who have nothing to party with. That's what the church is called to do in the world today. So E-Hills, I just want to say, your reputation precedes you, and from everything I know about you, you care for your community, and you are trying to live out the love and the joy of Jesus. And I just want to remind you today that you have everything inside of you that you will ever need to do that. If you're a follower of Christ, you have the same spirit living inside of you that is the same spirit that raised Jesus from the dead, and you have something that your community needs. So love your church, love the church, and recognize that you have an opportunity to participate in it. Look, she's scarred, and she's marred, sometimes she's stained. And despite the fact that sometimes she is imperfect because of the hypocrites who run her, when she looks like Jesus, isn't she lovely? Isn't she wonderful? So you can't love Jesus and hate his bride. So let's be a better bride, the one that Christ deserves. And let's change the world in doing it. Father, thank you so much for the time together this morning. Thank you for E-Hills, Lord. And thank you so much that this is a church that wants to be for their community, for their region, for those who have nothing to celebrate, for those who no one is throwing parties for, God. Would you help them to continue to be that? Would you help them continue to show this entire region that Jesus makes our life better? It's in his name that we ask these things. Amen.